Well, the Bengals are 0-3 and have lost three heartbreaking games in a row. And unfortunately, the hangover that has seemed to follow the team last year has carried over, and the Bengals just cannot get on the right foot this year, although things were better against the Green Bay Packers. Hi, everyone. I'm Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I hope you all are doing well despite the Bengals' poor start. I hope you somehow enjoyed that game. It was much more enjoyable to watch than the first two games, obviously, but unfortunately the Bengals just did not pull out a victory. They lost to the Green Bay Packers in overtime 27-24, and they still can't seem to put all three, to use a cliche, they still can't seem to put all three phases together in a week where, you know, the first 2 weeks the defense played pretty well, and the offense didn't show up. This week the offense showed up pretty well for a half of football. The defense sacked Aaron Rodgers 6 times, had a pick 6. Their kicker missed a field goal. So they just can't seem to put it all together. And there are a lot of questions now with this team and how they move forward from a loss like this. This could be something where it springboards them. The Green Bay Packers are a good team, and it was on their home turf. The Green Bay Packers are a good team. Aaron Rodgers, Hall of Famer. They played pretty well for the most part. It's going to be interesting to see if this is a springboard that turns their season around, or if this is something where, things just continue to spiral out of control. I'd like to think it's the former and not the latter, but we've seen this team do a lot of different things after a crushing loss. I don't want to say a week 3 loss in a game that really you aren't expected to win is crushing, but you have to kind of look at it and say, after losing the first 2 games and losing them the way that they did, this was kind of a bit of a must-win game, especially from a confidence standpoint, and the Bengals didn't take care of it. I'll be joined by my co-host, Scott Schultze, in just a little bit. On tap tonight, we're going to be talking about this loss for a little bit. We're going to be talking about Marvin Lewis and Andy Dalton's future with this team. There are a lot of questions we've received from listeners about that. Obviously now an 0-3 start after a 6-9-1 season last year. Questions are starting to pile up. Andy Dalton, though he hasn't turned the ball over in the last 2 games, he's still missing wide open guys. He's not making the right reads, and there's a lot of questions there. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the upcoming Battle of Ohio Part 1 this year. Not sure how excited both fan bases are for that at this point in time because both teams are 0-3, but it is what it is. And then we have some listener questions we're going to get to. We've already, as I mentioned, got some throughout the week, and some that are very frustrated fans that came our way, and we'll still be taking a few more to end the show, and we want to hear from you, so leave those in the YouTube chat. Get us on Twitter at BengalsOBI. Or if you're tuning in via CincyJungle.com, you can leave those in the comment thread as well. Thanks for tuning in. Aside from getting in touch with us on Cincy Jungle and Twitter, we're at email, theobinsider@gmail.com, and you can download the show on iTunes, on SoundCloud, and then obviously subscribe to our YouTube channel to get a lot of video content and all of that. I'm still waiting for my co-host Scott Schultze to show up here, so I'll kind of continue on my talk about the loss to the Green Bay Packers. There is a lot of positives to take. There are a lot of positives to take from this game. Bill Lazor, Andy Dalton in the first half looked sharp. He looked pretty poised. He did miss a couple of throws that were head scratchers, and then as what a lot of people think, the Bengals got off their offensive script in the second half. They just were kind of a mess, couldn't get things going. And then, of course, as it is, Joe Mixon did have a good day. He had 21 total touches, 18 rushes, and 3 catches for 101 total combined yards. So pretty productive day from him. But of course, everybody, and I've heard it already, his little slip towards the end of the game on a short yardage situation where you kind of got to have that. The Bengals don't. It's kind of a microcosm of a lot of things, and you don't want to single out Randy Bullock. You don't want to single out Joe Mixon. You don't want to single out the cornerbacks, but I mean, as you start piling up the usual suspects, I guess, for this loss. I mean, well, maybe not usual suspects, but as you start piling up the names as, a little play here, a little play there, I mean, I don't want to say necessarily that Randy Bullock missed a clutch kick because it was in the middle of the third quarter, but second half field goal try, you miss it and you lose by 3 points in overtime, that looms large. And when you see Jake Elliott, the guy who's now the rookie that the Bengals drafted, he's now with the Eagles, and he hits a 61-yarder to win it for the Eagles. Yes, he missed one earlier in that game. Still, stings to see the decision-making process that the Bengals had there. Mixing with a freak deal where he slips. There's so many different things where all of a sudden it's the little things that are piling up. And I think that's why Marvin Lewis is being called into question. Andy Dalton, while he hasn't turned the ball over the past 2 weeks, as I mentioned earlier, he's missing wide open guys. He's not making the right reads. He's not getting out of certain play calls at the line of scrimmage. And a lot of people really liked Tony Romo's breakdown as he called the Bengals game this Sunday. And, I think he was a little over the top, but I still found his insight to be really spot on, and he really broke down plays very well. And for a guy, this is a guy that didn't play last year and, obviously knows current NFL offenses, knows the reads, and I think he brought a lot of things to light with Andy Dalton and his struggles. Now, the offensive line in front of him struggled at times, but there were also other instances where, Andy's just running away from pressure that isn't there. And I think that's disappointing, especially after you saw the guy from 2015 to 2016, more so obviously in 2015, have career years, just doing a lot of great things for this team. And now he has really taken a backslide with the Bengals. They're 0-3. Some positives to take away. I mentioned Mixon. I mean, he had some good things. I thought Bill Lazor had a good plan with the running backs. I thought, he said Jeremy Hill is good in those short yardage situations for the most part. Jeremy Hill was in there and grinding out those tough yards. I thought, they did some good creative things with Giovanni Bernard to get him involved. He had a receiving touchdown. Mixon was kind of their jack of all trades. He did a little bit of everything and had a couple of big plays. So I thought he used the running backs well. I thought he really answered the call from A.J. Green saying, give me the ball, give the playmakers the ball. And he did that. A.J. Green had 10 catches, 111 yards for a touchdown. And, other players made some plays. Unfortunately, he didn't have Tyler Eifert to lean on this week. He didn't have John Ross to lean on this week. So it's going to be he might not have him this next week either. So he's going to need to continue to find ways to get their stars involved who are healthy. I thought Carl Lawson played a great game. Obviously, the pass rush in general just did well. The Packers' offensive line is a little bit of a shambles, so you take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. But if you sack Aaron Rodgers 6 times on his home turf and you score 24 points at Lambeau Field, more often than not, you should come away with a win. And they just didn't do it. I think now I'm joined by my co-host, Scott Schultze. Scott, are you there?
Yes.
How are you, sir?
Okay. Get over a cold.
You are okay. I hope not only that you recover from that quickly, but I hope you are recovering from this loss quickly as well, because this one hurt a little bit, because this seemed like the Bengals kind of to use a cliche expression, grab defeat out of the jaws of victory. I mean, they had a 14-point halftime lead. They come out, they score 3 points in the second half, and Aaron Rodgers takes advantage of that. Your overall impressions of the Bengals, obviously there were some positives, and this was the best we've seen them play this year. That's not saying much. But obviously some positives to take away, and I mean, is the season lost after 0-3? And I think this is kind of where we're going to segue into next. But I mean, was this a game they had to have because of the first two games and how those played out?
I don't think it. I mean, I guess pretty much until you're on the verge of elimination, nothing is real. I mean, they're all must-win games to some degree, but it looks like a very winnable division. I mean, I don't think Baltimore or Pittsburgh are the Baltimores and Pittsburghs that we're used to. And they do still have a fairly easy schedule because they did finish kind of low last year. So I think this is a team that still has a chance to go somewhere. That being said, the thing I really want, and I am probably, I'll say that for later. But yeah, out of the, realm of reality, I think this team could turn it around. Obviously 0-3 doesn't help, and if you look at the statistics, teams that start 0-3 making the playoffs is extremely low. And of course the reason for that is because one, if you're 0-3 you're not that good, or B, you're just putting yourself in a huge hole, and with all the difficult it is to go on a huge run and win 10-11 straight, that you're even if you have a good year, the 0-3s sometimes could be enough to sink you because you just can't overcome that, because you just can't, go on that 12-0 run or something absurd like that. That all being said, I think the win or the loss was, I guess, more encouraging than not. And as you mentioned, because after the first two games, it was just nice to see offense from our team. That was an encouragement. I mean, I also like that they were getting Mixon involved in the game. I know his final numbers weren't that good. And, when you're getting tackled at the line of scrimmage in the backfield, there's not a whole lot you can do with that. Sanders and playing on turf, it's kind of hard to turn a 5-yard loss into a 20-yard gain every play.
Right.
But it was nice to see that they recognized, hey, this is kind of our future. This is the guy we want to go with. Let's get him involved. I also like that they sat Fisher for a bit. Jake Fisher's kind of struggled. Andre Smith got some playing time, so that was kind of nice to see that they are trying some things on the offensive line, trying to fix some of those issues. And then you mentioned the defense. Obviously, 6 sacks or whatever it was is very good, especially on the road against a very good quarterback who's very elusive. And as you mentioned, it's not exactly the greatest offensive line we went against, but still, 6 sacks is 6 sacks. And it's one thing, a quarterback like Rodgers, who tends to be a very good one, who's very, very mobile. You can get pressure on those guys, and obviously with the bad offensive line, it's one thing to get pressure on them, but then to actually get them down and sack them. And that was the thing that I really liked was, we should be getting pressure on him because of their offensive line, and our defense is supposed to be, our front seven should be a lot better than their blockers. So that's pressure. That's one thing. But hey, this is a very good veteran, elite quarterback who is very good about getting out of pressure and extending plays. Can we turn that pressure into sacks? And to see that happen, that was the thing I liked. That not only are we getting pressure, but we're containing, and we are also, generate those sacks from that. And their good thing was the defense. This is like the third straight week the defense has held a running game in check. We held Ty Montgomery to something like 30, 35 yards on 12 carries, and I know they ran a whole lot, so 35 yards, it wasn't a lot of carries, but still it's like 3 yards a carry or just under there. And that's a guy that averaged, 6 whatever yards a carry last year. So obviously, the front seven's doing really well. They're getting pressure. They're turning the pressure into sacks. They're stopping, opposing running backs. They're doing everything you want to see. So it's not like the first two games where it's, where the offense was a total mess, and the defense is overwhelmed because they're just on the field the whole game. This time it was, we were in the game, it was competitive, it was a good game. And of course, when you go in the season thinking you're a good team, you don't want to have to walk away saying, well, we look like a good team. That's what you expect for a team that's not going to win many games, to have those moral victories. But after the first 2 weeks, it was as much of a moral victory as you could have, that, hey, they look like a team that we expect to see, except for the score.
So And I agree with you on a lot of different points that you made there. I guess where I would go, even though there's a lot of little things that you look at individual plays, you look at some missed opportunities, you look at the bad second half in terms of just basically a full collapse. But this still was the most entertaining, or probably the best all around performance that this team has put out this year. Again, not saying very much, but I guess I want to ask you, when you saw the end of this game and you saw the end score and kind of, overtime loss, the whole thing, what was your takeaway in terms of in placing blame? I mean, again, the Bengals had a 21-7 halftime lead, and they ended up losing 27-24. So do you put that on the defense letting up that many points? Do you put it on the offense for not getting more points on the board? Do you put it on special teams for not creating big plays and Randy Bullock missing a kick in the third quarter? Is it just a lot of little things from all three phases? Is it the coaching staff? I mean, when you walked away from that game and you saw the end result, where did you point the finger? Where did you say it's because of blank?
I guess that's a good question. When you look at the final numbers, obviously Aaron Rodgers had a great second half, and I think it's one thing where you have to kind of go back 3 weeks and say, we're looking at these 16 weeks. How do we expect to do? Obviously, most Bengals fans expected we're going to win week 1, we're going to win week 2, we're going to go to Lambeau Field, we're going to get beat. So the fact that if we were 2-0 and had lost this game, I think the general consensus would be, it was a good game. We were close. We took it overtime. We're supposed to do. We just got beat, but we kind of figured that we're 2-1. That's kind of where we expected to be. It's where we're at. No one's losing any sleep. That's kind of what we're. But the fact that you were 0-2, that obviously makes it a much bigger game. And then you see kind of how they lost. You're up 21-7, and then obviously you get outscored. Give up 20. You get outscored 20-3 after that point. And I guess you could say, well, it doesn't really matter when you score the points. The fact is, you scored this many, they scored that many, regardless of when it happened. But in football, I don't think it's that simple. I think, okay, there's something going on. Is it halftime adjustments? And that obviously goes back to the coaching. Is it that the coaches weren't, getting something right? And then if you figure, okay, one of the touchdowns was a defensive touchdown, that big, interception return by William Jackson III. So you factor that in, okay, well, we actually only scored, you could say 17, and so we shouldn't have been up as high. And so you throw things like that in, and it's very, I think for me, it's hard to assign one particular spot. I mean, there were some penalties, extended drives, a couple times, I think, where we had them stop on a third down, and either it was a encroachment or whatever that gave them an extra first down that allowed them to continue drives. So you could say, well, it's discipline, it's things like that. But I think for me, the biggest thing would probably be you look at the difference between the two halves. It's got to be, and this is something we've hammered on Marvin Lewis for this way too often. And someone who's been a head coach this long, you really shouldn't think you'd have to keep hammering on him with this, is halftime adjustments. And of course, this is a guy who says that they don't exist, that they are in the realm of fairy, tooth fairies and whatever. And so if you believe in tooth fairies, ignore I said that. But if you don't believe in tooth fairies or whatever it is, and Marvin Lewis doesn't believe in halftime adjustments, and you see that the first half you're up 21-7, you're shutting them down. Their offense really isn't doing a whole lot. Your offense is. In the second half, you get one score, and there's something obviously wrong with that. And I think to me it just goes back to the coaching, because that goes back to the whole Marvin Lewis thing of where. He's kind of been hit on this in the past, the fact that he doesn't really game plan for other teams. And what he does is he kind of looks at, this is our team, this is what we want to do, this is who we're going to be. We don't care who we're playing. This is what we want to be. We want to be a running team, a passing team, whatever. We're going to dictate what we want to be. And, that's fine. It works if you're playing, Division III college, or Ohio State or Alabama's playing Murray State. Yeah, that's something you can do. But when you have two good comparable teams playing each other, you can't do that. You have to constantly adjust to what they're doing and, strategize and all those kind of things that he just doesn't seem to have that mindset. And I think that's the one aggravating thing is that, after their third drive, they went punt, 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 missed field goal, punt, field goal, and then a punt. And I think that was, their every drive they had after those first three. And the first and third one, they had 10-play 79-yard and then a 9-play 60-yard. So, two very, very big drives. And outside of that one late in the game where they did make the field goal, they just didn't do a whole lot. And you can say, well, it's not adjustments, it's just dumb luck. But there's a reason you're having drives and all of a sudden they stop. And then you look at the other team and they're not having drives. They went -7, 9, -4, and 3 yards, and then -9 yards in like 5 of their first 7 drives. And then, they have a 75-yarder, a 52-yarder, a 20, a 75, and a 70 at the end. And clearly, whatever change they're making is working. Whatever change we aren't making isn't working. And for me, it just has to go back to coaching because you don't see that every week and say it's just, it's just luck or it's just, effort or, it's just it is what it is. It's someone's making it, other teams are adjusting, they're fixing things, and we are just, no, we're going to do what we're going to do, and so be it.
Royal Flush 513 in the YouTube chat agrees with you. He blames Marvin and the coordinators according to what was written in that chat room. And by the way, you mentioned the Tooth Fairy. The Tooth Fairy is a creep. If you actually think about who the Tooth Fairy is and what the Tooth Fairy is about, coming into your house and stealing your teeth that fell out of your mouth and leaving you money, that's just creepy. But
although Santa sneaks in your house.
Yeah, and Santa does sneak in. All of these people are they break into your house. It's weird how that works out.
And he's a 350-pound guy. I mean, the Tooth Fairy is like magically sneaking in, but a 350-pound guy, coming in a chimney when most people don't have chimneys. To me, that's a little scarier.
Yep, and he's he probably needs to be on the gluten-free diet, old Santa. But that's a different subject for another time, Scott. You're segueing well into
Christmas.
Christmas, yes, but another segment that's coming up next. But before we do, I just want to get a couple of final thoughts for you. Or from you. Bill Lazor at offensive coordinator in his first game, and some of the young players that stepped up and either played very well or didn't. I thought Darqueze Dennard, William Jackson, Carl Lawson, guys that they had drafted recently played well. You mentioned Jake Fisher struggled. Cedric Ogbuehi, probably not a terrible game on his part, but it's not. He still isn't Andrew Whitworth on the other side. So, just wanted to get your quick thoughts on Bill Lazor in his first game as the Bengals offensive coordinator, and then some of the young players that were making some plays on Sunday.
I guess I'd say a B. I mean, after no touchdowns in 120 minutes, it was nice to see 2 offensive touchdowns, especially on the road against a solid defense. So that's obviously a step in the right direction, but then again, you look at the adjustments, and after that third drive, they had no offensive touchdowns for the rest of the game. And and once it got to crunch time, they need to get the points on the board late in the game. They weren't able to do it, and then you look at the overtime period, same thing there. Didn't really do anything. So I want to give a high score just because of what we had done previously, but it's just really hard to give too high of a score, just because there were no adjustments. Whatever he did worked well for 20 minutes, but after that, it just kind of went away, and there was no response.
Yep. Carl Lawson played very well and abused Kyle Murphy, a backup tackle for the Green Bay Packers. And fun fact, Scott, Kyle Murphy is my second cousin. I don't know if you know that or not, but I am related to that guy. So while I wanted him to do well, I'm also glad to see Carl Lawson play well. And let's hope Kyle Murphy ends up playing well against other teams down the road, because I hope success for him, just given that we're blood, right?
Yeah, and I think that's whenever you have guys from like your hometown or people who you have like some sort of connection to, it's cool to see them do well in all the other games, just not when they're playing your team.
Right, right.
So yeah,
right.
I mean, him giving up all the sacks to Carl Lawson is great. Especially if he has a great year after this week. If he goes out and has it
Exactly. Stonewalls a bunch of guys. Yeah, and I do think, in fairness to Murphy, I do think he's more suited to right tackle or maybe even a guard position in the NFL level. I don't think he's an NFL left tackle. But for those of you who saw Kyle Murphy and saw him get a little bit abused, you can think of this face because he is a relative of mine, and hopefully he does well going forward. So, Scott, we mentioned we've talked about Dalton now, and we've talked about Marvin Lewis now, and I don't. It's 3 weeks into the season. Yes, they're 0-3. Yes, they haven't played well, and yes, those two, just because of the positions they hold with the club, are under the most scrutiny. But I think rightfully so. And I guess we'll start with Marvin Lewis because he's an easier target. Okay. 15th year with the Bengals as a head coach. And to me, I looked at this Sunday, 14-point halftime lead, as I mentioned, lack of a killer instinct at the end of the game. Your point, failure to make halftime adjustments. And this team, I said it right before you came on, this team just does not seem to do the little things right. And I said, and whether it's a luck thing or whether it's a discipline thing, Marvin Lewis is known as kind of a player's coach, quote unquote, where he relies on some steady veterans to kind of be the locker room glue. Not saying he has zero control of the locker room. I think the players respect him. You saw, if you follow Adam Jones on social media, he wished Marvin Lewis a happy birthday last Saturday and said, this guy's been like a father to me. So I think Vontaze Burfict said the same thing about him. I think the players really like him. The problem is whether it's him, whether it's coaching his coaching staff under him, they're not doing the technique things right. They're not doing the little things right. And they don't seem to have that foot to the throat type of mentality. I get that they're playing Aaron Rodgers in Lambeau Field, and that's a very tough game to win. I get that Marvin Lewis was previously 3-0 against the Packers with the Bengals while playing Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. I get it. But to me, this was kind of an inexcusable game to lose. And they did it in such a Marvin Lewis / Bengals way. Missed field goal. 3rd and 1, Joe Mixon slips and doesn't get it. Lack of halftime adjustment. I mean, the list can kind of go on and on. Starting with him, I mean, obviously now the knee-jerk reaction is to say, let's get rid of him because the Bengals aren't playing very well. They're 0-3. He's in the last year of his deal. I mean, what's gonna get him? I'm trying to figure out a question to form a question to properly encompass my thoughts with this. But I guess your thoughts on Marvin Lewis, his future with the club. I think he's safe for the entire year, but he's got to do a lot of different things to keep his job beyond this year. And I don't even know if we would want him here after that. I mean, it's kind of, we're seeing kind of a broken record, aren't we?
Yeah, this is something where, I mean, this seems to come up almost every year, especially early in his career. After 2005, everyone was ecstatic. Oh my gosh, we're not losing. We've had 500 seasons, and we just made the playoffs. This is incredible. And then, of course, they were out for a few years. They made it again. But after a while, people are like, okay, this is kind of all we're getting. Where's that next step? And we've been asking that for a decade, and it's still the same thing. And people, after Dalton came in, there were no expectations because we just lost Carson Palmer. We don't have Ocho Cinco. We don't have there's really nothing positive. We're going to win like one game. We're going to become the Browns or the Lions.
Right.
And then, like, wow, this guy's a great coach. And then the next year they make the playoffs again. Wow, this guy's a great coach. And then the next year, and then the next year, and then the next year, and I'm like, oh, wait a second, shouldn't we be going farther? This, and so there's been several. You can probably look back at his career with the Bengals. There's several different times where it would have been very, say, this guy should have been let go. And it just did not happen for whatever reason. And you look back at the whole body of work and you think, well, how did it not happen in any one of these cases? Because the problems you see in 2017 or 2016 aren't new ones. It's not like all of a sudden, something, an act of God happened that, wow, this guy's been great, and all of a sudden they're having a bad year. Like if Bill Belichick and the Patriots all of a sudden went 2-14, you'd be like, wow, that's just so uncharacteristic. Let's figure what caused this. Did Tom Brady cancer and Gronkowski missed the whole year, and I don't know, and Foxborough got swallowed up by a black hole. I mean, you'd expect something like that. But with the Bengals, it's just no, that's just Marvin Lewis. And the fact that he still has that job, and you expect to see some sort of improvement. If you have a job, so long, you expect to see you're going to learn, you're going to get better, you're going to improve the things you don't do well. And ideally, at the end of, the decade or two, you're getting better at those things. And that's the problem, is you don't see that, and you don't really ever see any sort of push from above him to get better at those things. Him and Mike Brown seem to have this kind of relationship where they're both kind of content with where they're at. So I don't think Marvin's getting pushed to do any better. If he could or couldn't, I don't know. I don't know if he could ever get better at learning about halftime adjustments or how to take control of a locker room or become a leader. And that's kind of the one thing you see looking way back to when they had the Chad Johnson circus. It became the Chad Ochocinco thing and that whole fiasco. And you saw some of that on like the Hard Knocks videos. And it just seemed like he didn't have control of the locker room. It was kind of I know Carson Palmer was kind of frustrated with the whole thing. And it just seemed like, the players kind of do what they want. They like him because he's kind of laid back. And as long as that, no one's pushing him, he's cool. He's not pushing anyone. You just kind of do what you need to do. And after a while, it just seemed, okay, we got better because now we have some good veterans, and he lets there's the Whitworths, the Peckos, the Robert Gathers. Those guys are going to do what I should be doing. They're going to keep this team somewhat in line and, be the leaders, be the example that I don't want to be. And I can't imagine like a real workplace environment where that is a healthy culture where the manager is just kind of laissez-faire to say, whatever, I'm just, I'm not a great manager. I'm just going to sit here and kind of sit in my office and do my thing. And there's some hard-working employees, and they'll just kind of keep the other guys in line, and we'll just do well enough at producing widgets or whatever. That's kind of cool. And the CEO really doesn't care. He's kind of happy with our department. If we make 50 parts this year or 100 parts this year in our assembly line, whatever. And that's kind of the culture they have. And in the real world, I just don't think that's something that shouldn't fly. So I think, from the top down, there's just a lot of cultural issues, I guess would be a good way to say it, that, you don't have high expectations of him. He doesn't really seem to do a lot as far as we can tell from the outside, as far as being a good leader, someone that's pushing people to get better, that's, demanding. It's you don't seem to have that from him. He doesn't seem to have the skills as far as the adjustments, that killer instinct, to go 0-7 when you get the playoffs is a totally different animal, and you see it from the other teams. All of a sudden, they are a different team. They're energized, they're charged, they're doing the things you need to do. With his teams, it's like, whatever. Well, maybe we'll win, maybe we won't. Prime time, so we probably won't. But yeah, it's just very. So I think most fans would say, and I would agree that, his time should have been a while ago. It's definitely got to be now. I think he probably does survive the year because I don't know who they'd promote from within. I don't know if they would have want to make Gunther or Laser an interim head coach somewhere in the season, or if they would just say, no, we're going to ride with Marvin because we have him. Because then if we hire one of those guys from within, then we're minus, a couple coordinators who we now have to kind of move everyone up the chain and, do. So who knows what they would do at this point. I think it's time for him to move on. As far as Andy, I think that's a different animal. But as far as the Marvin thing, I totally agree. It's well past time.
Yeah, we'll talk about Andy in just a second here. A couple of comments. If the Bengals lose this week, will Marvin be fired? No. Or does it depend on the way in which they play Sunday? No, I think I agree with you that he's playing out this year because he's in the last year of his contract, and Mike Brown, with his loyalty, will let Marvin Lewis play unless this team is like 0-12 or if they're awful, that you might see a change. My nightmare would be personally that they promote Paul Guenther. All of a sudden they win a handful of games, and then Paul Guenther gets handed the head coaching job. Not that I don't think he's completely incapable. I would just rather like to see an outside hire if Marvin Lewis is gone, given how Marvin Lewis did change a bit of the culture once he arrived from Baltimore. I do find it ironic. He comes from Baltimore, and he had guys that I wasn't privy to his coaching style when he was in Baltimore. I was a bit younger, and I didn't really follow Ravens beat writers and whatnot about Marvin Lewis's coaching style with the amount of stars he had on that defense, that record-setting defense. I just find it funny that he has a record-setting defense, one that basically won them the Super Bowl. He comes to Cincinnati, and I love the laissez-faire comment you made there, Scott. The inmates are kind of running the asylum at times, and I think Lewis has done a better job of late in terms of getting higher character guys in his locker room and really relying on those guys. I don't necessarily agree with you that he's kind of sitting in his own little mini ivory tower and letting other people kind of do the work for him. I don't agree with that necessarily. I don't think he has the resources that many other head coaches have. I just look at this team, and yes, it was pre-Marvin too, but in these big you look, the beginning of this season is a microcosm of Marvin Lewis's tenure as head coach, in my opinion. Can't beat a Hall of Fame quarterback with a 14-point lead. Can't win on primetime, and the team doesn't play well on primetime. And opening week, stepping on your own toes and making mistakes and doing all kinds of things that make you look foolish. That's not the way you want to start a season in which you are really trying to emphasize a rebound from a poor season last year. And I'm wondering where the clutch gene is in this team. Andy Dalton doesn't have it. Marvin Lewis doesn't have it. Maybe AJ Green has it, but hasn't produced a playoff win. The choking of this last week really just upset me, and really, this was a game that should have been in the bag for the Bengals. Not going into it, but the way they played in those first 2.5 quarters or so. This was a game that they should have had, and they did not. And the urgency, I think, initially was there. It was not there after halftime. The fact that a coach who has 15 years in the same position and has numerous years coaching at the college and NFL ranks, the fact that he doesn't want to recognize that halftime adjustments exist really bothers me. And, I think, like I said, it's the minute details. It's the little things. You see these little frustrating penalties, these missed plays and all of that. And, I've said this before on Cincy Jungle. I've said it before on this show and other interviews and whatnot. A team tends to take a profile on of their coach, their head coach, their assistant coach, and it almost seems as if Marvin Lewis is lacking maybe on the discipline and the details type of stuff, and saying, let's draft these uber talented players from uber talented programs and let the talent take over and not really focus so much on details. And yes, he says, let's do things the right way. We got to execute better, kind of coach speak. So, unfortunately, and Scott, I want to get your take on this before we move on to Andy. Unfortunately, Marvin this team has relied on the draft. You look at the last handful of drafts that they've had. Really, 2010 and 2011 have seemed to carry this team in terms of, in 2010, Carlos Dunlap, Geno Atkins, 2011, Dalton, AJ Green. These are Clint Bowling. Those are classes that have kind of carried this new version of the Bengals team. 2012, through 2016, 2017, you've got a lot of injured guys. You've got a lot of guys that aren't playing well. And you've got a lot of guys that aren't on the team anymore in terms of high picks. Giovanni Bernard, Margus Hunt. Gio's a good player, had a lot of injury history. Tyler Eifert, another guy who's had a lot of injury history. John Ross already looking to maybe miss his third game of 4 in his rookie season. Cedric Aboyehi, Jake Fisher, Darquez Denard had a good week last week, but largely been kind of a disappointment. William Jackson had a good week last week, missed all of last year with an injury. So I don't know, man. Are we overrating Marvin Lewis's draft prowess?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to. I mean, it's you kind of hit the nail on the head with how we're living off of past drafts, and we have had some very good drafts where it was generally guys who fell to us. I mean, you mentioned 2010; that was a huge one. Getting Carlos Dunlap and Geno Atkins in that one. 2009, they got Andre Smith and Michael Johnson. Not that Michael Johnson's great, but he was, been a solid player. He was someone who projected to go much higher. He fell to them. 2012 was one where Kevin Zeitler was there when they traded down. He ended up being really good. Later, they got Marvin Jones and George Iloka, both in the 5th round. Iloka was considered to be, I think, the top strong safety that year in the draft. The next year, with all the quarterbacks, or the year before, 2011, they got Green, and obviously you're picking number 4, so not too many guys are falling. But getting Dalton when they did, when all the other teams were taking guys like Ponder and Jake Locker and all these guys ahead of him, so that was something that kind of worked out. But since then, you look at 2013, you had Eifert. He's great when he's healthy. He gets hurt. Bernard, they took him over some other running backs, most notably Le'Veon Bell, who obviously I think most people would probably flip that now if they had their choice. Margus Hunt never did anything. Hawkinson, Hamilton, so on. And you look at the next year, that's when they traded up to get Russell Bodine. Will Clark never did anything. Darquez Denard, when he's healthy, has generally struggled when he's been on the field. And some of there just wasn't that same oomph for them. Then next year, Aboyehi and Fisher both have struggled. Tyler Kroft has battled, to keep his second string job. Paul Dawson, has kind of vanished off the face of the earth.
Yep.
Those other guys have seemed to make much of an impact. And you go to 2016, they drafted a guy who was hurt. He seems to be pretty solid. So that one may have some possibility. Boyd looks like he could be a decent, second or third receiver for a team. But yeah, they've definitely been living a lot off of those past drafts, but now those guys are starting, and those guys are in their second contract. Well, at some point, those guys are either going to get old or they're going to get in their third contract, and eventually they're going to leave. And if you're going to live and die by the draft, you have to constantly hit on the draft. If you're going to avoid free agency, you can't have, a couple bad drafts in a row. So you have to hope that someone like John Ross, that, okay, we drafted this undersized, injury-prone receiver off at some point. And, obviously if he misses 3 games out of 100, that's fine. But if he misses, 3 games out of 3 and then 50 out of 60, or, if he ends up with a Tyler Eifert kind of injury history, and you knew going in, it's not like Eifert where he was healthy and then all of a sudden got hurt his second year in the league. Here's a guy who, had an injury history in college. You kind of knew at Washington, hey, this is a smaller guy. He gets hurt a lot. He's hurt when we drafted him. And if he can't get healthy, then, who do you have to blame but yourself for that fact that, hey, we're clearly not doing something right.
Yep. And I love that you brought up the free agency / draft comparison, or whatever you want to call it. I've been a bit more of a proponent of the Bengals doing more in free agency, not necessarily overspending or getting the highest priced guys in free agency, but I've been more of a proponent of that because the draft is a crapshoot, and they seem to want to put so much stock into the draft and leave quite a bit of a surplus of money. And you would think that they could get another player or two to upgrade a starting position, and they just don't want to do it. So I'm glad that you brought that up. I mean, if you are going to rely almost solely on the draft and or re-signing just your own in free agency, you got to nail the draft. I mean, you got to nail it. And I think every year, we get excited, and I think because there's so many draft gurus and so on and so forth that this guy can do this and this guy, I think we get excited, and then you look back and you go, oh, I don't know. They've now rolled the dice, and I guess in their mind it was a roll they needed to make in terms of the tackle positions. That's blown up in their face. The center position still hasn't been improved a lot. So there's just a lot of different issues that are being exposed, frankly. Whether and it's not just on Marvin. I mean, it's a lack of scouts. It's Mike Brown. I mean, we know those issues as well. Quickly to talk about Dalton. This year, and we knew this year could be sketchy for him because of the potential offensive line struggles. I got a comment on the Cincy Jungle chat boards from our friend Keith Evans. I believe he's in the Bahamas. So, Keith, hope you're well, man, with all the weather that's going on down there. Essentially, he just writes, what's wrong with Andy Dalton? He looks jittery and lacks confidence. I think that has something to do with the offensive line. But there are times, Scott, and if you watched Green Bay, the game against Green Bay, and you saw Tony Romo break down a play after the fact, and if you follow Brian Baldinger on Twitter, I suggest you do so. He did some film review over the past couple of days, basically stating that this offense is so frustrating because they have a ton of talent, especially at the skill positions, and just aren't doing the little things correctly. And we can sit here and say, Marvin Lewis is to blame, blah, blah, blah. When your quarterback turns the ball over against a division rival 5 times in the first week, when he's not hitting wide open guys for big plays and first downs the subsequent weeks, and he's getting sacked often, about 4 times a game, but he's also missing guys because he's sensing phantom pressure. That's not what you want out of a quote-unquote franchise quarterback. And before I kick it to you, Scott, I want to say, obviously, this is an easy tee-up topic that we could probably talk about every week on this program, Andy Dalton and Marvin Lewis and their job status. But you also have to know that Andy Dalton is in the last team-friendly year of his contract extension he signed a couple of years ago. Marvin Lewis is in the last year of his contract. So I think now, after an 0-3 start, this is more of a pertinent conversation to talk about. I mean, we got a question on Twitter earlier, Scott. If the Bengals go 0-6, 1-7, whatever, is that A.J. McCarron time? Or is it, let's ride with Dalton and let him play out the season? How much blame should be on Dalton for this 0-3 start?
I'll just say, if we go 0-7 or 1-7, I'd say let's bypass McCarron. It needs to be Jeff Driscoll time. Because McCarron's probably gone. I mean, if he plays, he's just auditioning for another team to give him starter money. He's doing a, Matt Flynn, Matt Castle thing where put him in, he looks good, and then, some quarterback desperate team decides to throw him, something like $12 million a year for 3 years. I mean, we saw that with Osweiler when he went to the Texans a couple years ago. So putting McCarron isn't really going to do anything, because at that point, if you're 1-7, 1-8, realistically, you're not really. I mean, you're trying to win, but you're not trying. I mean, those draft picks at that point become it's much more valuable to have the number 2 pick as opposed to the number 12 pick and winning some games when you're clearly out of the playoffs. So I think at that point, the thing you're trying to do is you're trying to see, okay, we have this Driscoll guy signed for a couple of years. If he's the guy they bring back from the IR designated return list, why not throw him in, give him real game action, and see, is this someone that we can play with, or are we just, overreaching because he has some promise that we've been tempted by and he's just not that good? So I'd say move on from McCarron and go straight to Jeff Driscoll, because you have Driscoll beyond this year. McCarron probably, we may guess there's still debates about whether he'll be a free agent or not, based on his service time, based on how they put him on, didn't play him his first year and said he was hurt when he really wasn't hurt and all that kind of stuff. As far as Dalton, one name I'm going to throw out who he really reminds me of is a guy named Mark Bulger, who, if you do or do not remember, Mark Bulger was a quarterback for the Rams, I guess a decade ago already. He inherited the team that was the greatest show on turf when Kurt Warner started getting hurt. He had all these great weapons around him: Marshall Faulk, Isaac Bruce, Torrey Holt. It's great offense. They had tons of success. He steps in his first couple years. He goes 6-1, 12-3. Great seasons, has a 101 quarterback rating his first year. Everyone's like, wow, like this guy just stepped right in. He's really good. He wasn't a great quarterback. No one ever, confused him for, an elite quarterback. There was nothing special he did, but he was in a good offense, had a lot of good weapons around him, and did fairly well. Starting out his first few years, he did fairly well, but then you sit back and look at his body of work, and you saw that, basically he's a league average quarterback surrounded by a lot of good weapons. And as time went on, he's a decent. And then his last few years, once he turned 30, things kind of went downhill. Whether it was his body, his whatever it was, something, he just stopped being as productive. He had those decent years, and then just kind of got worse and worse and worse. And then, by the time he was in his early 30s, he was out of the league. You look at another guy 10 years later, Andy Dalton, not a great, elite quarterback. He doesn't have elite arm strength. Doesn't have that great pocket presence. The things you want to see in a great, quarterback. No one's going to confuse him for, Aaron Rodgers we just played, or Manning, or, Brady, or one of these people. He's a solid player. You give him good blocking. You give him a lot of good weapons. And just like Bulger, he can put up, good numbers. He had that very good year in 2015. You give him the equivalent of a Torrey Holt. You give him AJ Green. You give him good pass protection. You give him time. He can find Tyler Eifert. He can get these guys. He can get the decent numbers, but he's not that guy that's going to carry you. And you look at their careers. Their number of touchdowns. I think they both have the same number of touchdowns over like the same number of games, or some number like that. And they, in the same number, interceptions are just kind of similar. I mean, Dalton's only ever had one season above 30 or where he's reached 30 touchdowns. He's, neither one is really a great player. They just kind of had, decent careers with, occasionally had good numbers because they had so many good things around them. Well, now Dalton is hitting that. He just turned 30. And so to me, it just brings back flashbacks of Mark Bulger when he turned 30 and his career just went downhill. He had a couple bad years for the Rams when they were still the St. Louis Rams, then he was gone. And so to me, what I see is, okay, he's 30. He's been in the league for a while. He's not a great quarterback. Is he just getting to a point where either he's just not fully into it anymore, or his body is, just getting a little too old, or something where he's just becoming Mark Bulger. He's going to get a little worse this year, a little worse next year, and eventually, he'll be out of the league.
It's a great.
Not saying that's what'll happen. Just what it appears like.
No, it's a great comparison. I think you mentioned it last week, too. I love that comparison. That is a great comparison. And the other thing that Mark Bulger had, that Andy Dalton had a couple of times in his career, but Mark Bulger had a great offensive mind as his coach in Mike Martz. Dalton had Hugh Jackson and Jay Gruden and a couple of, in parts of his career. So, even though he's had a lot of offensive coordinator turnover, I think he's now on his fourth in his seventh season now. So, that affects him. But I agree with the surrounding talent thing. And that's always been Andy Dalton's MO. You give him, and that's why the Bengals drafted A.J. Green and they drafted Andy Dalton. Let's get him a star receiver. Let's get a new quarterback. And I think what you're saying plays into a question that Michael Myers brought up. So what happens if the Bengals bring in a new coach because a new coach wants his own QB? Totally depends on the coach. I think most likely it would be new coach, new quarterback, but there's kind of that weird thing. Hugh Jackson now is in, I believe, his last year of his contract with the Browns. If the Browns have another disappointing season, they may not re-sign him. Maybe he comes back to Cincinnati and thinks he can recreate the magic that he had with Andy Dalton in previous years. We'll see, but for the most part, I think if this season ends up going the way that an 0-3 start usually goes, I think this would warrant new coach, new quarterback, and that's why we brought up this topic. And it kind of stinks because if you look at Marvin Lewis, the guy, Andy Dalton, the guy, not football minds, not football people, they're great people, and they do a lot for the city of Cincinnati. They do a lot for through their foundations and whatnot, and you want them to do well on the field, and unfortunately just hasn't fully come to fruition. So that's kind of why we're talking about this. Hopefully it changes for both of them. We'll see. Kind of hard to say. Scott, let's briefly talk about the Browns, get some listener questions in, and get out of here. Before we talk about the Browns, just so all of you know, in case you're new to this program, we're on iTunes, we're on SoundCloud, we're on YouTube. All of our content's on Cincy Jungle, so you can get all of our content there. And if you aren't able to join us live every week, join us on Cincy Jungle and YouTube. On YouTube, there's a chat room where you can talk with a bunch of Bengals fans live. On Cincy Jungle, there's a comment section where you can leave comments, questions, and we try and get to those. And if you haven't yet, follow us on Twitter at BengalsOBI. You can also send us an email, theobinsider@gmail.com. So we appreciate the feedback from you. Scott, I don't know, man. It's the Battle of Ohio, Part 1. First of all, there's been some comments and questions in the chat room. You're wearing a number 5 Browns jersey. Is that Jeff Garcia? Who is that?
Yes, this is actually a Browns jersey.
Is it Jeff Garcia?
Yes, it is. I think it's the last time they actually had a quarterback that wasn't atrocious. Not that he was great.
So you're on it? No, yeah. You're on a Bengals podcast. They're playing the Browns this week. Not really sure of your ties with Jeff Garcia personally, but why are you wearing that jersey? Because we've been asked this a couple times already. Actually,
I guess several reasons. I looked in the closet for something to wear because I just came in from the garage and was doing cutting some wood and doing some stuff. I saw that jersey. I'm like, you know what? That's the first jersey I ever got. It was free. I got it as an elephant gift. I kept it. I usually don't wear it. I'm not a Browns fan, so I really haven't worn it, since I got it. But we're talking about the Browns, and it seems relevant. And then also you look at, okay, week 1, I wore a Geno Atkins jersey. We got beat. I think I might have worn that again in week 2. We got beat. So I need to try something different. I'm going to wear the jersey of the opposing team.
There you go. Okay. Getting the reverse mojo juju going. I like it. I like it.
Works, I don't have any Bills jerseys, so someone would have to send me one.
The fact that you got a Jeff Garcia Browns jersey as a white elephant gift is just freaking hilarious. Oh my gosh. I don't know why I find that so funny, but I do. It's so funny. At any rate, I'm going to try and concentrate because I'm almost crying laughing right now. This week, man, I mean, you can look at, A.J. Green and Jeremy Hill have recently been Browns killers. The Bengals have recently dominated the series, and really throughout Marvin Lewis's tenure, they've dominated the series. There's a couple hiccups back in, I believe, 2012, 2013, where the Bengals split the series with them. Both teams are 0-3. These coaches are very familiar with each other. Bengals are facing a couple of injuries, potentially missing out in case, as of Wednesday, Tyler Eifert and John Ross both haven't practiced. It looks that Tyler Eifert is more likely to miss the game than John Ross is, but both seem kind of unlikely at this point. I don't know I mean, on paper, and we've said this for probably at least 2 of the first 3 weeks, on paper, the Bengals seem to have more roster talent. This one's in Cleveland. Both teams are hungry for a win, man. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this one. I kind of feel like it's either going to be a Bengals blowout or it's going to be a nail biter either way. I mean, and it's weird to say that Cleveland can potentially pull this one out, but am I saying to the guy who's got the Jeff Garcia jersey on, am I crazy in thinking that Cleveland might have a realistic shot at this one?
No, I think it's possible this team could win, and the Browns team, for those who aren't seeing the video. Although, as you mentioned, you kind of look back at their history. In the last 25 games, the Bengals are 19-6 against the Browns, and we've won the last 5 games in a row, and every single one of those games we've won by double digits. So anyone who's followed the Bengals the last few years, you think, the Browns' first thought is, there's no way. That's a gimme. We should win that game by 10, 20 points. And the last few years we have. And over the last decade, we pretty much have won, the vast majority of these games, almost 80%. And so that being said, I don't feel as confident this year, especially this game in Cleveland. They're also 0-3, but they're kind of a different 0-3. They've lost 2 of those games by 3 points. And you look at the one game they played at home was Pittsburgh, who is supposed to be, a lot of experts picked them to win the division. That's a game the Browns easily could have won. They lost by a field goal. Last week, they lost by a field goal on the road. The second week, they lost by a couple touchdowns, but they had 5 turnovers, despite having a lot of yardage on offense. And so they're one of these teams that, they probably aren't going to the playoffs this year. They're not a great team, but they seem to be, they're not an 0-3 like like one of these teams where you look at, like a 1990s Bengals 0-3 team. They're not getting blown out 37-0 every week. They look like a team that can compete. They have a good offensive line. Their run defense has pretty much they shut Le'Veon Bell down the first week. Last week, they shut Frank Gore down. They're letting those guys average like 2.5 yards a carry. So they're clearly doing something right. And if they ever get Myles Garrett in, put him on opposite of Emmanuel Ogbah, they could have a decent pass rush. They have a lot of the pieces there. The big thing with them has always been the quarterback. And DeShone Kizer, he especially his first year in as a guy who was seen as more of a project. He's probably not going to have a world-class year. He's thrown a lot of interceptions this far. But we've mentioned on this podcast before, the Bengals struggle with rookie quarterbacks. Now, granted, the last time we played the Browns, they had a rookie quarterback named Johnny Manziel. We pretty much handed it to him. But I think everyone pretty much did in the NFL, so maybe not a fair comparison. So I don't know. I think it's very reasonable to say, if the Bengals came away from Cleveland 0-4, I'd be disappointed, obviously. I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be like, wow, where did that come from? Because I just don't see this Browns team as bad as an 0-3 team that we see on the record, and not as bad as the teams we've blown out the last few years. They're not starting Cody Kessler. They're not starting some of these other guys, Kevin Hogan, whoever else they've had at quarterback. They seem to have a guy
Jeff Garcia.
Yeah. I'm not even sure if we beat him back then, but I'm thinking the recent years when they had Manziel and some of these guys that they were just trying to find anyone to play quarterback. Because they have that that jersey with the list, the 35 names or whatever. They were trying to build to it, and I get the impression they're probably not trying to add to that anymore. They're probably trying to say, let's see if we can stick with a guy for a while. So yeah, I'd say it's definitely in the realm of possibility. And then you look at things like, okay, well, what if it comes down to a very close game? Do we trust Randy Bullock, who's a career? He missed that kick you mentioned in the game last week. That was one that would have given him a 2-touchdown lead. It wasn't, a game-winning kick, but it was a fairly critical kick because that is what would have given you a 2-score lead when the Packers are starting to heat up in the second half. And for the year, he's 4 or 5, which puts him at 80%, which is pretty much where he is for his career, which I think is why both of us were grumbling a month ago when they cut Jake Elliott for Bullock, a guy who's a career 80% kicker who's going to end this year as an 80% kicker because that's just who he is. And he's not a guy that's going to get you the big important kicks. He's going to get you 3 field goals in a meaningless game because you're getting beat by 20 points. He's not going to get you the one you need. But apparently we drafted a guy who can nail you a 61-yarder to win a game.
Yep, and I said that at the beginning of the program. Yeah, that was a tough pill to swallow if you're the Bengals and or a Bengals fan, seeing what Bullock did or didn't do against Green Bay and seeing what Jake Elliott did to win the game with a 61-yarder. I like that you brought up DeShone Kizer because the Bengals have had their struggles not only against rookie quarterbacks, but against quarterbacks who can move around in the pocket. Kizer has had 17 carries for 87 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. He's thrown for 3 touchdowns and 7 interceptions through the air. So the Bengals defense is going to need to do something to play better against a scrambling quarterback, potentially, or a mobile quarterback, whatever the term you want to use, than they have in recent memory. One thing that they do have going for them this week is Vontaze Burfict should be back from his suspension, and he's a guy who, despite his penalties, despite some of his questionable antics, he is a guy who is a very heady linebacker. I saw a question, Royal Fush 513 and others in the chat room talking about how much do we expect him to play. I don't know the specific answer to that question. I mean, we've seen him come back from the PUP list, and the Bengals wanted to take it easy on him against the Steelers a couple of years ago, but he was just maniacal and playing out of his mind in Pittsburgh that helped them get the win that week, and he was out there almost every snap. Now, this is a week where he's not coming back from, rehabbing an injury. He might be a little bit out of condition, but this was also an offseason where he supposedly was in the best shape of his pro career. So I would expect him to play a lot. I don't know if he'd play almost every single snap, especially the way the defense has been playing for the most part with him out of the lineup. But he is a guy that I think will be key to shadow Kizer. Do you agree, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, either that or I think you have to do something. And I agree with you what you said about having him in every play. I think he has to be in every play. Well, as much as his body can handle, because I guess he may not be in football shape, even though he is in great shape. But yeah, I think you have to have someone shadow, just like with Aaron Rodgers. Other than that one play where he ran for the first down, I thought they did a very good job of. We kind of talked about this last week too. Okay, pressure Aaron Rodgers. We have to pressure and contain. And that was something we talked about last week on the show, and that was something they did a fairly good job of. They didn't let him scramble too much. And same thing with someone like Kizer, or we've been burned in the past by guys like Tyrod Taylor, by Michael Vick, who you let run because they settle the guys deep. Your defense goes deep. You leave this big hole in the middle. They see it. They run for it. Now with Kizer, because he is a rookie, because he is still learning the position, you have to kind of wonder, is he a guy that's going to take off and run, or are you going to get lucky and he'll be one of these folks who doesn't do that? He's already run 17 times this year, so there's a good chance he probably would see the hole and run for it, especially since he has had trouble throwing the ball. So whoever it's going to be, you have to have someone shadowing him. I don't know if I'd pick Vontaze Burfict exactly, only because he's such a great instinctive coverage corner, or not corner, linebacker, whatever position he plays. I mean, you see some of the stuff he does when he's covering guys. He had that pick 6 in the preseason. And he's done that with their teams in the past where he instinctively reads where the play's going, where the quarterbacks want the ball. And he's someone who, could cover, whoever the Browns are going to use with Duke Johnson out in that kind of role. But you definitely need to have someone either shadowing Kizer, or, have your whole linebacker safety or someone alert that, hey, you need to keep an eye on this guy, peek in the backfield when he's when he's scrambling, or on these, or look at the game film and, hey, on these certain plays when they do this bootleg or this type of motion, that's a play where this guy runs. You need to recognize that, and so, whoever's going to be assigned to him has to be the guy that is on him on that play, and hopefully it's someone that can tackle. I mean, it does no good to shadow the guy if you can't tackle him.
Right. It just, the Bengals, whether you look at Robert Griffin III a few years ago when he was with the Redskins, whether you look at Ben Roethlisberger and his dancing around in the pocket, whether you look at Deshaun Watson just a couple of weeks ago, the Bengals just have problems really containing a lot of those mobile quarterbacks. So I think that's going to be a key for this week, and that's going to be my key. And before I get your key and prediction, Scott, for this game, I would like to know if this win, again, even though it's against a winless Browns team, a team they have largely owned, I'd like to know if you think that this is a potential season changer for the Bengals. Because I look at it, they're 0-3. We've talked about it ad nauseum. At Cleveland, winnable game. You host the Bills, winnable game. You have the bye week. You're at Pittsburgh. You host the Colts. They look terrible. Then you're at Jacksonville, kind of a Jekyll and Hyde team. You're at Titans, pretty good team. You're at the Broncos. Then you have the Browns again. So there's a stretch of very winnable games this year. And I guess aside, the sub-question that goes with, is this game a season changer, potentially a season changer for the Bengals, is the fact that they're relying on so many young guys. Is it just, it takes, sometimes it gets more into the middle and the late games of the season in order for a young team to really find its stride, for the coaches to really utilize these guys to the proper extent. So, I mean, is this game a potential season changer where a team like the Bengals, who are 0-3, could potentially make a ridiculous late push to the playoffs? Or is this just one where, if they win, they're still probably going to be a 6 or 7 win team?
I'd say I don't think a win is a game changer, because like you said, if they do win, looking at the schedule, the way this team is playing, unless they make some drastic changes, the next couple of weeks, they just aren't playing like a postseason team. They don't have a postseason coach. They just, all the things we've talked about, it makes you from 5 wins to 6 wins, or 6 to 7. And you have a very nice, Jeff Fisher like 7-9 season instead of a 6-10 season. Could be very season changing for this team. You lose the game, you're 0-4, not to make the playoffs at that point at 0-4, having faced, the Browns, the Texans at home, and the Ravens at home. Three games that you should have won. Okay, you've gone through an easier part of your schedule, and you're sitting 0-4. You play the Bills right before the bye week. Win or lose that one, you're 1-4, 0-5. You go in the bye week. Then you could see some things happen. So I think that loss could be much bigger than a win could be. Not that, obviously it wouldn't be big, but I think a loss could do a lot more to this team, either to the psyche or to personnel changes or some changes they make. And I did actually look. I was kind of curious. They have, in that decade in the 90s, there were several times they changed coaches, and they were all mid-season. I think I don't have it up anymore, but Bruce Coslet was a mid-season fire.
Yep.
I think the same with Shula.
I think he was a mid-season hire too. He was a mid-season hire and fire.
Plays Shula, who was a mid-season fire, and then Dick LeBeau replaced Coslet, who was also a mid-season.
Yep.
So I think it's very possible they could. If they're sitting 0-5 at the bye week, there is a chance. If Marvin Lewis is losing the team, if they're not getting any better, if they get, if they look bad at home against the Bills, and this, supposed to be the big 50th, year, and we're 0-5 to start our 50th year. As much as Mike Brown has that loyalty thing, if they did say, yeah, we need to change more, okay, we got rid of the offensive coordinator, we found a scapegoat, we made that change. The offense looked a little better, but if you don't seeing that, I think at some point your change would happen. If they win, you can say, okay, we end up 2-3 at the bye week. We can. Even last year up until the end of the and try, hey, we're still kind of in the playoff race. If we win this game and that team wins and that team wins and that team wins and this team loses, and the stars align just right and this constellation is in this house or whatever, we have that slight sliver of playoff hope. So we can still kind of cling to that. It still kind of gives them that, hey, we still have that really, really, really far outside chance. 0-4 and then 1-5 or 1-4 or 0-5. I think that you're able to say, okay, this isn't happening. This year's lost. We're disappointed. We're also doubly disappointed because we're doing the big 50th thing and nothing. It's our worst season since the 90s. We're going to make some changes.
Man, would there be anything more ironic than an 0-5 start in their 50th anniversary? That would just be like, oh man. Prediction, Scott, on this game before we get to a question or two and get out of here.
I guess I'm going to make my prediction kind of,
and maybe a key, like the one key that you think the Bengals need this week.
I'm going to say I'm going to base my prediction on Toledo Central Catholic High School.
Okay.
And they've had 10 players go to the NFL. 3 of them have played for the Bengals. Brad Cozano, Joanne Armour, and Dane Sanzenbacher.
Joanne Armour. Oh my gosh, that's a blast from the past.
Or as Gruden would say, Sanzenbacher. And then 3 of those 10 have played for the Browns, the most recent being Deshaun Kaiser. So I kind of look at this as like it's the big battle of, Central Catholic, Toledo Central Catholic. Who's going to come through and really win this one, for Ohio football? 2 Ohio teams playing. So that being said, I think and I'm really hoping it's not a close game because I really don't trust Randy Bullock. I think some people might. I am not one of them. But I think when it's said and done, I just think I don't think we have the coaches they do. I don't trust our special teams kicking. Well, everything except for the kicking, I guess. I mean, I trust, the returners and so forth. I just think we have too much talent not to win. I think somehow our talent finds a way to overcome Marvin Lewis and some of and I think when it's all said and done, we manage to pull it out. I think AJ Green finds a way to get, some balls thrown his way. I think Joe Mixon probably breaks loose. I'm probably being optimistic, because I just said a minute ago, I wouldn't be surprised if we lost the game. But, until we're like 0-10 and we're just getting blasted every game, like, until we look like Prairie View A&M on Saturdays, I still want to have a glimmer of hope. So I'm going to say we win. If I'm going to make up some numbers because I'm an engineer, I like to make up numbers, I'd say 20-13. Okay. I'll say 20-13 Bengals.
Marvin Lewis and the Bengals, especially when they kind of try and build on things, they like to take baby steps. And for those of you who not only watch his show through Cincy Jungle, but look at the content that both Scott and myself and many other great writers provide, not that I'm a great writer, but others on the side are great writers. Like you, buddy. You're a good writer. I put up a game preview every week. And spoiler alert, I'm going to kind of say the same thing, and I'm going to cop out here, Scott. The Bengals like to take baby steps, and they like to little bit build by build. They barely lost last week. So I'm going to say they tie this week because Marvin Lewis loves his tie games. And you and I know this. It's a painful thing. So I'm going to say 23-23, tie game. And that way they don't start 0-4. And we can't really rah-rah quite yet about a 1-3 start given this easy stretch. A little bit sarcastic.
So you're going to get your tie out of the way early this year.
Yes. A little bit sarcastic, but if we know anything about Marvin Lewis, do not unexpect a tie because he has pulled those out quite a bit. I do think that I do think this is a winnable game for the Bengals, and I do think that the Bengals have a better team and could very well run away with this. But I've watched this team too long to really know what to expect with them. So I'm going to kind of play Switzerland and be neutral on that one. Scott, let's get out of here. We've tried to answer a bunch of questions. Usually we answer questions at the end. We've tried to. Fortunately, some of the questions have come through that have been pertinent to our segments and our topics. And by the way, Brian McHugh in the chat room, 34-16 Bengals. Royal Flush is back-to-back overtime games. James Napke says Mixon 175 yards rushing. That one is probably something you could take to the bank because the Bengals tend to run all over the Browns regardless of the result. But we did get an email, and Scott, unfortunately, this is another email from another Bengals fan who went to a game in person and witnessed a loss. If you remember back, we had one of our listeners email us from the UK and said they went to the Ravens game. And now we have John Telly, who went to Lambeau Field on Sunday. I'm going to go through this quick. There's a couple of questions, though, and I think it's pertinent. I was at Lambeau Field on Sunday. It was hard to watch the second half collapse. I keep thinking Mixon's slip and how that play may have changed the outcome. I look forward to hearing your take on the game. John, I hope hopefully you listened to the first portion of the game. We talked about that. Against all reason, I'm still not ready to give up on the season. I like the rhyme there. They seem to improve with each game, and I think they'll be a playoff-winning football team soon. Oh, boy, John, I wish I had your optimism. If you assume that they'll need 10 wins to make the playoffs, then they can only afford 3 more losses the rest of the season. I'd be interested in hearing your opinions about where they are most likely to get their wins, or to put it another way, what 3 teams they will lose to. In my opinion, if they only lose 3, it'll be the Steelers in Pittsburgh, the Broncos, and the Lions. What do you think? Well, and I want to get your take on this too, Scott. My first take is 9 wins might sneak you into a wild card. And I say that because you look at, and this is what was disappointing about the Bengals last week, pooping away, whatever verb you want to use, a 14-point halftime lead, because the Steelers lost to the Bears in overtime, a game they were not supposed to lose. The Ravens got shellacked in London against the Jaguars, and the Browns lost. So the Bengals had a chance to really kind of climb out a little bit of the cellar, only be about a game behind some of those teams. I don't think the Ravens will last. They beat the Bengals 20-0, and yes, we can sit here and say the Bengals may not be very good in general, but the Ravens keep losing players. I didn't see a ton from that game aside from them allowing the Bengals to make mistakes to tell me that they are a very good team. Pittsburgh losing in Chicago, I think, was kind of a weird, and the whole being in the locker room for the national anthem is another story for another time, but I don't think Pittsburgh looks the same this year. I still think they'll be very competitive, potentially win the division, but I think this is a year that the Bengals could sneak into the wild card if they turn things around with a 9-win season. The AFC East isn't that strong. The AFC West is strong, but you probably have one division winner and one wild card out of that division. I think 9-7 could get you in there. We'll see. The games, I mentioned it earlier, the Bengals are now entering a stretch of games that are very winnable. Say they win this week at the Browns, that's 1. They win when they host the Bills, that's 2. Say they lose, it's at the Steelers, okay? You host the Colts, you win that one. And then you got to sneak probably 2 of these next 3 where you're at Jacksonville, at Tennessee, at Denver. You probably got to sneak 2 of those, and then you really got to make some hay the next, the remainder of the schedule. But I think the Bengals have maybe four more losses, maybe 3 and a tie, right, Scott? But we'll see. 0-3 does not bode well for a team making the playoffs, but there's a winnable stretch of games, and this is still as I mentioned earlier, this is still a young team kind of trying to find its identities. We've seen Marvin Lewis's team both stumble down the stretch and make great rebounds down the stretch. So it's going to be interesting to see how this rest of the season plays out, right?
Yeah, well, it seems that they win down the stretch when they're out of the playoffs, and then they lose down the stretch.
Exactly.
When they're trying to get a bye.
Yep.
But to answer the question, if I had to pick 3 games, I'd probably go at Pittsburgh, at Denver, because we probably won't have Geno Atkins for that game. And I think at Minnesota, because I think that's late in the year. It's a road game. Minnesota will have Sam Bradford back. They'll be playing for a playoff spot. So I'd say those are probably a 3. Although I agree with you. I think 9 wins could win this. I think 9 wins could win the division. Because, like you said, I totally agree. I don't think Pittsburgh and Baltimore are the Pittsburgh and Baltimore we're used to. I think, the games Baltimore's won, we had all those turnovers, and so we kind of give them a game. They got to play the Browns at home and won that game, and the Browns had 5 turnovers. So all Baltimore's shown is that if you give them, the ball 10, 11 turnovers, they're not so horrible that they can't win that game. But when you actually have to play a team that doesn't turn the ball over 5 or 6 times, they got blasted by 30, 40 points. So I'm not convinced in Baltimore. I think Pittsburgh isn't the same Baltimore, or obviously Pittsburgh's not the same Baltimore team. Pittsburgh's not the same Pittsburgh team. They have been in the past. They don't look like it so far this year. So I think 9 wins could win the division. And plus the team who's probably the best in the division of the year 3 is Pittsburgh, and you still have 2 games against them. So in theory, if you sweep the Pittsburgh series and you win 9 games, you would have the tiebreaker and you could probably get in the playoffs. But that means, you have to win a lot of these close games. You have to win 1 or 2 against Pittsburgh. You have to win in Baltimore. You have to beat the Lions. You have to beat, you have to sweep the Browns. You have to win at Jacksonville, at Tennessee, at Denver. And that's a back-to-back-to-back stretch in the middle of the season. So there's a lot they have to do. But it's possible. Was it last year when the Chiefs started horrible and they ended up winning the division? So yeah, I'd say anything. I guess our person asked a question, I'm not ready to give up on them just yet. But yeah, there's a lot that have to do.
Totally agree. And by the way, Scott, how tall are you, if you don't mind me asking? You're muted. How tall are you?
As I was saying, you can't tell from the video screen.
No.
We don't have, just put a ruler up to it. I'm pretty much right at 6 feet.
Okay. I'm 6'2". You and I should probably go try out for tight end at the Baltimore Ravens, because they are decimated at certain positions. Wide receiver, tight end. They are just struggling, and I think that unfortunately that's going to catch up with them at the end of the year. So, if you want to pull an invincible in terms of Mark Wahlberg and, if they hold an open tryout, maybe you and I can go. I will say this. If you look back at 2011, when things looked and the roster looked far more bleak with the Bengals, they started 1-2. They went on a 5-win streak against the Bills, the Jaguars, the Colts, the Seahawks, and the Titans. By the way, 4 of those teams are who they face this year in that stretch of winnable games. Not saying that 6 years ago they have the same teams that they do now, but kind of a weird parallel. And then, of course, they were swept by the Ravens, swept by the Steelers, and they still made it into the playoffs that year. Now, granted, it ended in heartbreak, but, stranger things have happened. Finished 9-7. I think they might be able to sneak in with a wild card this year, but they've really got to change some things. They got to get healthier, especially on the offensive side of the ball, and they got to start gelling on the offensive line and in a number of different ways. Hopefully, Bill Lazor makes a number a big difference. And by the way, I feel bad for John Telly. I feel bad for other listeners who have told us that they've been to games and have been disappointed. Do us a favor. Maybe not go. Maybe not go to a game. And whatever. I mean, sell Paul Brown Stadium out. But for those of you who may tune into this program, maybe take a break from a game, because it seems like when you guys go, including myself, I went last year to the Broncos game, the home opener, and it blew up in my face too. So maybe let's take a little break from going to the games and watching them, and hopefully they'll have some better results. But I say that a little tongue in cheek, because going to the game's fun too. Scott, any final thoughts before we get out of here, my friend?
I guess nothing.
I saw you eating chocolate ice cream earlier, so I know you got your dessert in. I'm glad you did. I know you're a big dessert guy.
It wasn't DQ. It wasn't Culver's. It wasn't anything Cold Stone. It was this kind of generic. But it is in our part of Ohio right now. It is it's unseasonably hot. It's probably the hottest weather we've had all year, and so I've been doing a lot of work outside in the repainting a garage and doing some wood cutting and sanding and varnishing and that kind of stuff. And so it's kind of nice, to have a little reward that cools you down from, that 95-degree heat and humidity.
I got you.
And just looking for a Bengals victory for a change. If they don't get it this week, I want it next week, because I'm going to be at the game next week.
Oh, gosh, I just said don't go to the games, and you're going. Come on.
Well, if they lose, then we'll know. When we got the tickets, they run the field.
That's true. Well, I hope you have a good time, and I hope they definitely win that one for you. That's the Bills game, correct?
Yep.
All right. Well, I hope they win for you, my friend. I don't really have any other final thoughts except for echoing your sentiments, and I'm envious of your handyman work, man. I'm not a handy guy. I wish I was. I wish I was. That's true. I guess I haven't seen the finished product.
I mean, it's one thing to build a workbench and paint a garage. It's another thing. I mean,
to be able to use it.
Yeah, two different people can build something. I mean, you have something. Two people can make a car. But, the Yugo and the Honda Accord don't exactly have, the same lifespan. So that's one thing to say. I've never built a car, and I wish I could build one, but it kind of depends on what you're building. So
I tell you what, for those of you who are tuning in to this program, either live or downloading it later, keep listening to us for Bengals insight. Maybe not listen to us for handyman and or fixer-upper type of insight, because even though Scott may be better than me at it, I don't. Maybe we're not pros yet. Maybe we're not fit to go on HGTV yet, my friend.
Unless we fails or.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. If you're new to this program, thank you for listening. You can download the program on iTunes, on SoundCloud. You can get our content on YouTube and Cincy Jungle. We're also reachable via Twitter at BengalsOBI and via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. We appreciate all the feedback. We appreciate, even though we said we don't like hearing from people or listeners who have gone to games. I'm kidding. We obviously love hearing from you. And we're sorry that the Bengals didn't come up with wins for you this year. But hopefully there are more down the stretch. There's a lot of season left. I don't want to make it sound too doom and gloom, even though it's not very positive right now. There's a lot of season left. So stick with us. Stick with the Bengals. And hopefully they start to turn things around in 2017. For my co-host, Scott Schultze, I'm Anthony Cosenza. This has been the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, your Bengals fan podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in live. Thank you so much for downloading the program. We will see you next episode.